I was just settling into my usual evening routine, the soft hum of the air conditioner filling the living room, when my phone buzzed insistently. A message from my lawyer flashed across the screen. "Call me immediately!" My heart skipped, a quick, nervous stutter. I gripped the phone tightly, my hands trembling slightly, and for a moment, the quiet suburban street outside my window felt heavy with expectation. I wasn't used to being the center of any urgent matter. In my family, I was often overlooked, my contributions invisible, my voice a whisper in crowded rooms. That thought gnawed at me as I dialed. The calm of my surroundings clashed with the sudden surge of tension inside. The lawyer's voice came through brisk and slightly strained. "Madeline, it's urgent. Your brother-in-law sold your house." I froze. My mind spun, disbelief mingling with rising anger. "Sold my house? But that's mine. I have the deed." Each word felt heavier as it lodged in my chest. Betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet assumption that you'll be overlooked. And that was my family's specialty. I could almost see the smirk, the assumption that I would never notice, never challenge, never fight. My fingers tightened around the phone as the room seemed to shrink around me. The lawyer went on, detailing how the sale was executed without any acknowledgement of my ownership. I sat back against the couch, the folded napkin from our last family dinner, innocuous yet symbolic, resting on the table in front of me. A small, silent reminder of how I was always sidelined, always invisible. I let out a slow breath, trying to gather myself. Flashbacks surfaced unbidden. Years of overlooked efforts, contributions never acknowledged, moments when my presence felt optional. The mental tug-of-war began immediately. Should I confront him now, storm into a situation I hadn't fully assessed, or should I watch, gather evidence, and plan? Every instinct screamed both caution and defiance. I thought of the subtle hints I'd noticed over time, the dismissive glances, the offhand remarks, the little slips that now seemed part of a larger pattern. They had been breadcrumbs leading to this betrayal. I resolved to act with precision rather than impulse. First, I would confirm the facts, review the documents, ensure I knew every detail. I would strategize, consider the conversations to come, anticipate every potential reaction, and prepare my responses accordingly. Control, I reminded myself, was my advantage. I could feel the tension ebbing slightly as I embraced a methodical approach. This wasn't just about reclaiming a house, it was about asserting my place, quietly but firmly, against those who assumed they could disregard me. The lawyer concluded the call, leaving a charged silence in the room. My mind raced. What exactly had he done with my house? The thought alone sparked a mixture of anticipation and unease. I knew my next steps needed to be deliberate. Evidence would be gathered, conversations carefully considered, each move calculated to protect what was legally mine while exposing the presumption of entitlement my brother-in-law had assumed. My inner voice, usually quiet, now whispered a firm, unyielding vow. I would reclaim what was mine, not with anger unchecked, but with strategy, intelligence, and a resolve tempered by years of knowing the weight of being overlooked. The evening shadows deepened outside, mirroring the uncertainty and tension I felt, as the first steps of a carefully plotted response began to take shape within me. The house was quiet now, the hum of the ceiling fan the only sound keeping time with my racing thoughts. I sank into my chair, staring at the folded napkin from the last family dinner still on the kitchen counter. It seemed ridiculous, a small, almost invisible thing, yet it carried the weight of years of being overlooked. My mind ran through a checklist: confirm the deed, track every action my brother-in-law had taken, identify every point where family had assumed I wouldn't notice. Anxiety mixed with determination, a strange clarity forming amidst the tension. I reminded myself to stay calm. Panic would get me nowhere. I had to be deliberate, intelligent, precise. I could not allow the past to dictate my present. By the time I arrived at the county records office, the sky had darkened into a deep indigo, streetlights glinting on the damp pavement from a light rain earlier. The fluorescent lighting inside felt harsh, but it kept me alert. I went straight to the property records section, scanning the files for the parcel number I had memorized long ago. The deed confirmed my ownership, Yet the sale had been processed under signatures I didn't recognize fully. There were subtle discrepancies, odd timestamps, and an unfamiliar notary's mark. My eyes narrowed as I noted each inconsistency, understanding that this wasn't a mere administrative error, it was calculated, deliberate. While the staff moved quietly around me, I observed them with the same caution I had applied to my family over the years. Every glance, every movement could reveal clues about how this betrayal had been facilitated. Memories of being dismissed and underestimated fueled my resolve. I would not allow invisibility to remain my fate. Flashbacks came unbidden, sharp and bitter. Years ago, a promotion I had earned was quietly handed to a cousin, while my work went unmentioned. I remembered the sting of humiliation and the quiet laughter behind closed doors. That memory now mirrored the house sale, a calculated decision, a casual assumption that I would not act. Each recollection sharpened my focus, reinforcing patience as a strategy, intelligence as armor. I realized the anger I felt was useful only if guided, not wasted. Observation and methodical planning would outweigh impulsive confrontation. My mind mapped out the possible scenarios, rehearsing conversations I might have to conduct, predicting evasive maneuvers from my brother-in-law, and strategizing countermeasures that would keep me steps ahead. By late evening, I had made the call I had been hesitating over. My voice was measured, polite, but every word carried an unspoken weight. I was reviewing some records and noticed a discrepancy regarding the house. Could we clarify a few points? I listened carefully, noting each pause, each flicker of defensiveness. He answered with a casualness I recognized as a facade, dismissive and slightly arrogant. Frustration rose inside me, but I kept my tone calm, letting patience sharpen my awareness rather than cloud it with uncontrolled anger. The lawyer's assistant, who I'd enlisted for guidance, reminded me subtly to maintain composure while probing for inconsistencies. Every question, every measured inquiry, was a step in building a foundation for later decisive action. As I gathered the papers that detailed the transaction, a minor document stood out, almost easily overlooked, but critical. It suggested deliberate misrepresentation. My pulse quickened. If my brother-in-law assumed I would accept the surface story, he was gravely mistaken. I traced each signature carefully, my mind assembling a puzzle that others had underestimated. The room around me faded into quiet focus, every noise outside the office inconsequential compared to the strategy forming in my thoughts. I was no longer merely reacting. I was observing, calculating, preparing. This night, these discoveries would define the first moves in a confrontation I would not leave to chance. Morning light seeped through the blinds, painting stripes across the papers spread on my desk. I sat down heavily, my coffee untouched, mind racing over the findings from the night before. The county records, the unusual signatures, the minor discrepancies, they weren't mistakes. Someone had deliberately tried to erase me from my own home. I traced each mark carefully, reviewing emails and digital logs. My internal dialogue ran through every potential next step, each action measured so as not to alert my brother-in-law. Memories surfaced of small slights, overlooked birthdays, ignored promotions, whispers behind closed doors. Each one sharpened my determination, while a steady anxiety pulsed beneath the surface. I drafted a checklist: calls to make, documents to verify, potential witnesses to approach. The day had only begun, but I felt the weight of every past humiliation driving a meticulous strategy. I started with the digital investigation, contacting my lawyer first to confirm what could legally be pursued immediately. Then I discreetly reached out to trusted friends who had always offered an honest perspective. My emails and bank records became a trail of breadcrumbs. The pattern of the house sale was too neat, too concealed. I noticed suspicious activity in payment transfers, timestamps that didn't align with official procedures, and documents that seemed altered or incomplete. Calls to potential witnesses, a contractor who had done renovations, the realtor who facilitated the sale, and my accountant, provided subtle confirmations without alerting anyone. Each conversation was carefully worded, revealing tiny inconsistencies. The thrill of uncovering the truth surged through me, tempered by the patience I knew was necessary. Every small victory, every confirmation, built a quiet, undeniable proof that I was not powerless. Later in the morning, I made the tentative call to my brother-in-law. The line rang, then clicked as he answered with feigned cheer. I asked a neutral question about the deed, watching for hesitation, tone shifts, or any sign that he was uncomfortable. His responses were evasive, punctuated with arrogance and a dismissive casualness that only made my controlled anger tighten inside. I noted every pause, every slip, every defensive inflection. It was clear he assumed I would back down, that I would let his assumptions go unchallenged. I weighed the risk of pressing too soon against the benefit of gathering further evidence. My lawyer's assistant, listening discreetly on a conference line, nudged me toward patience, reminding me that timing would amplify my leverage. I ended the call with measured calm, hiding the storm of resolve gathering beneath my measured tone. By mid-morning, I had uncovered a hidden amendment buried within the property files, a clause that clarified the full extent of the deception. The paper revealed not only that I retained full ownership, but also how my brother-in-law had intentionally concealed the transaction. Shock washed over me for a brief moment, followed immediately by clarity and empowerment. The manipulation was broader than I had anticipated, involving not just him, but subtle collusion from family members who had assumed my inaction. I allowed myself a quiet, intense reflection. Years of invisibility, years of being undervalued, had honed my patience, my observation, and now my ability to act strategically. This document was the keystone. It justified every careful move, every measured conversation, every watchful eye I had turned on the situation. As the day moved toward afternoon, I organized my findings, assembling a digital dossier that left nothing to chance. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of awareness, the anticipation of what was to come. I knew when and how I would confront, and I would choose the moment with precision. The evidence was no longer abstract, it was irrefutable. Every phone call, every email, every carefully observed interaction built a fortress of certainty around me. I was prepared, strategic, and unyielding. The thought formed clearly, cool and steady. I have everything I need now, but patience will be my weapon. My eyes scanned the files once more, committing every detail to memory, every irregularity noted, every signature cross-referenced. The game had shifted entirely in my favor, and I knew exactly how it would be played. The morning sun had barely stretched across the neighborhood when I sat at my desk, the hidden documents from yesterday laid out before me. I traced the signatures again, my fingers moving deliberately over the pages, not trembling this time, but steady with resolve. Every detail confirmed what I suspected. My brother-in-law had tried to manipulate the situation, relying on my supposed inaction. I rehearsed conversations in my mind, imagining every response he could give, every evasion he might attempt. The quiet of the house contrasted with the storm in my mind. Past family dynamics replayed, the subtle dismissals, the laughter at my expense, the constant underestimation. I reached for my phone and sent a quick message to my lawyer, seeking advice on measured steps. Calm determination settled over me, though a controlled anger simmered just beneath the surface. Today, I would begin probing, carefully and strategically, without revealing the full strength of my hand. I started with a series of calculated emails and messages, each word chosen to provoke a response without exposing my intentions. My brother-in-law's replies came back with measured cheer, some avoidance, hints of overconfidence that told me more than his words ever could. I watched his responses carefully, noting hesitations, sudden changes in tone, and even the timing of his replies. In parallel, I reached out to friends and acquaintances who might hold information or insights, gauging where alliances or neutral observations could strengthen my position. Slowly, I began constructing a clear timeline of events, discrepancies stacked meticulously, forming leverage that could not be dismissed. Every observation was noted, every anomaly catalogued. My patience was tested, my internal tension building, but each small piece of clarity reinforced my strategy. By mid-morning, a neutral encounter brought him face to face with me. The meeting was casual, seemingly coincidental, yet every glance and movement held weight. His body language was subtle but telling, Crossed arms, quickened glances, micro-expressions of defensiveness. I maintained calm, measuring each phrase, each inflection, testing the boundaries of what he thought he could hide. My controlled frustration grew as I realized how brazen he had become, yet I held my composure, guiding the conversation carefully, planting questions to elicit revealing answers. My mind raced with possible countermeasures, analyzing every tiny reaction to build a map of his intentions and weaknesses. The encounter ended with no overt confrontation, but the tension remained, a taut string ready to snap. An unexpected call mid-afternoon shifted everything. A contractor I had spoken to quietly confirmed suspicions I hadn't fully anticipated. The details revealed not only deliberate misrepresentation, but also subtle complicity from others I had hoped were neutral. The emotional shock hit for a brief moment, a sharp pang that settled quickly into focus. Clarity replaced confusion. Tactical plans began to form naturally in my mind. Every note, every call, every document became a weapon, assembled carefully for a decisive moment. I felt the old sting of being undermined, the familiar invisibility, but now it fueled a firm resolve. The evidence compiled would not just protect my property, it would expose the manipulation and assert the truth firmly, without hesitation. By late afternoon, I had pieced together the final elements of the strategy, organizing documents, conversations, and timelines into a coherent plan. My hands moved with deliberate precision, no tremor, no hesitation. The weight of anticipation pressed, but the focus was unbroken. I reminded myself that patience was part of the power I held. Soon, the first move would be made, carefully calculated, unstoppable in its logic, and undeniable in proof. Every piece in place, I leaned back, letting the quiet of my office contrast with the intensity of what was coming. They would realize soon enough that patience had its own strength, and underestimating me had been a grave miscalculation. I was ready. By late morning, I sat in my home study, documents spread across the desk, my laptop open to a carefully compiled timeline of deeds, emails, and correspondence. Every detail pointed to the same conclusion. My brother-in-law had acted deliberately, counting on my restraint. I dialed my lawyer's number, steadying my voice before outlining the evidence, discussing each legal angle. Deed confirmation, property rights, contract review, every option was weighed with care. Frustration surged, yet I channeled it into cautious optimism, rehearsing potential conversations so that my composure remained unshaken. Premature moves could backfire. I would wait for the exact moment when leverage was absolute. Next, I reached out to witnesses who could solidify my case. The contractor who had overseen minor renovations, the realtor who had managed past inquiries, and the accountant who had handled financial transfers. Each conversation was deliberate, confirming that statements aligned with the documented evidence I held. I evaluated family members' possible reactions, noting who might support me and who could attempt to undermine the process. I began outlining a communication strategy to prevent misinformation from spreading, tracking every email, every phone call. Suspense mingled with growing confidence, the anticipation of seeing the pieces fall into place, sharpening my focus. By early afternoon, I initiated a subtle confrontation, weaving hints of legal action into a casual conversation. I observed every reaction, the slight stiffening of his shoulders, the evasive gaze, a flicker of arrogance that betrayed unease. I carefully measured my tone, keeping anger restrained, allowing strategy to guide my words. Every slip he made, hesitations, contradictory statements, minor misrepresentations, was catalogued mentally. The intensity of the encounter rose, frustration held firmly in check by calculated calm. Each observation shaped my next moves. Patience, I reminded myself, was the strongest weapon. Yet, the day brought unexpected complications. My lawyer discovered a previously unnoticed issue. A third-party document with subtle alterations and hidden signatures that complicated the legal landscape. My initial shock transformed quickly into alert focus. I reassessed the strategy, incorporating the new evidence, considering timing, disclosure, and potential ripple effects on family relations. The layers of manipulation became clearer, revealing deeper complicity than I had anticipated. Even as tension mounted, my mind remained disciplined, structuring the path forward with precision, every action calculated to maintain advantage. As the afternoon waned, I drafted a decisive legal document, carefully articulating claims, evidence, and requests in unambiguous terms. The first domino was set to fall, and I felt a quiet satisfaction tempered by anticipation. Every move had been considered, every contingency accounted for. I leaned back, reviewing the pages, knowing that by tomorrow the legal landscape would shift irrevocably. The culmination of research, observation, and strategic patience had brought me to this point. I was ready to assert control, and the first step of the maneuver would signal that I was no longer passive. The game had changed, and I held all the pieces. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the blinds, casting sharp lines across the floor as I reviewed the latest developments. My brother-in-law had ignored every subtle warning and taken further actions concerning the house, including misappropriating assets that had long been in my name. My hands tightened around the edge of the desk, shock flaring into a controlled, simmering anger. I forced myself to step back mentally, weighing each countermeasure before reacting. Drafting a strategic response plan, I revisited old family conflicts, recalling patterns that might predict his reactions. Every misstep on his part could become leverage, but I would strike with precision, not impulse. Working with my lawyer, we set the legal machinery into motion. Formal notices were drafted, subpoenas prepared, and documentation meticulously reviewed to ensure an airtight foundation. My focus sharpened. Determination tempered by the faint undercurrent of anxiety kept me vigilant. Timing was critical. A misjudged disclosure could undermine the entire effort. I confirmed that allies and witnesses remained aligned, ready to support every claim with credibility and detail. Each step was calculated, executed with measured intent, a chess game played with real stakes and a keen eye on the endgame. As the day stretched toward evening, tensions with family became more palpable. I communicated with key relatives, observing micro-expressions, subtle shifts in tone, and hesitant body language. Conversations were layered, polite yet pointed, testing boundaries and measuring allegiance. The frustration rose as I navigated their defensive maneuvers, but I maintained a composed exterior. Carefully controlled dialogue allowed me to assert my rights without igniting unnecessary conflict. I could see hints of guilt flicker in his eyes, masked by forced calm, evidence that my observations were not misguided. Unexpected complications surfaced mid-afternoon. A previously undiscovered forged document and potential third-party interference added new layers to an already complex situation. My pulse quickened, tension mounting, though I forced myself to remain alert rather than panic. The strategy had to shift slightly, preserving credibility while addressing the new challenges. Ethical considerations, what could be revealed publicly versus through legal channels, needed careful deliberation. I weighed timing meticulously, knowing that one poorly executed move could weaken the entire plan. Patience and urgency, a delicate balance, now governed every thought. By early evening, the first formal notice was sent, its contents clear and assertive, leaving no room for misinterpretation. I watched the digital confirmation pop up on my screen, a quiet satisfaction mingled with anticipation. In my mind, I whispered, "They think they've won, but they just triggered the next move." Every calculated action brought the inevitable reckoning closer. The escalation was set in motion, and I had positioned myself to control its course, ready to turn patience and strategy into decisive advantage. The night would come, and with it, the opening of the first critical move in a game long overdue. Evening settled over Houston, the sky painted in bruised purples and oranges as I retreated to my private study, the quiet hum of the city outside barely reaching me. I sank into the chair, reflecting on the legal maneuvers already in motion and the web of deception surrounding my family. Past miscalculations haunted me briefly, reminding me of the patience I had lacked in earlier confrontations. Determination mingled with lingering doubt. Could I anticipate every twist, every evasive move my brother-in-law might attempt? Mentally, I walked through every possible scenario, rehearsing responses, noting vulnerabilities, and identifying leverage points I hadn't considered before. Patience had become my most potent weapon, yet the pressure to act decisively pressed against me, a constant hum beneath my focused exterior. Coordination with my lawyer occupied much of the early evening. We reviewed evidence meticulously, ensuring each document, email, and witness statement was accounted for and could withstand scrutiny. I mapped out a step-by-step plan for the impending confrontation, sequencing moves to maximize impact while anticipating potential countermoves. Family dynamics were carefully evaluated, every relationship plotted for advantage, allies were confirmed, witnesses prepared, and contingencies rehearsed in my mind. I felt a focused intensity, a tactical clarity sharpening with every passing minute, each layer of planning reinforcing my resolve and confidence that this time the outcome would bend in my favor. As the family gathering began, subtle tension crept through the interactions. I observed every glance, every twitch of unease, and the faint, guilty hesitation in voices that previously masked confidence. Hidden agendas became apparent in small gestures. Forks paused mid-air, eyes flicking away, fingers drumming nervously against a glass. I engaged in careful communication, maintaining poise while asserting boundaries, feeling the invisible scales of authority tilt slightly with each measured word. Anxiety swirled beneath my composure, yet I relished the controlled observation, understanding exactly how and when to apply pressure without revealing my full hand. The evening deepened, and minor provocations from my brother-in-law tested my limits. Each taunt, each attempt to rattle me, was met with calm scrutiny, notes filed mentally for future leverage. Frustration rose, coiling tight within me, yet restraint remained my ally. I documented micro-expressions, statements, subtle slips, every detail a potential turning point for a well-timed revelation. Legal and social maneuvers were plotted silently, ready to deliver maximum impact at the precise moment. My strategy remained ethically sound, calculated, and relentless. Every move he made only highlighted the cracks I intended to exploit. By the close of the evening, a clear sense of inevitability filled the room. The next move was mine to make, and I knew it would set the tone for everything that followed. Thoughts coalesced into a single, unwavering conviction. Everything they had done had only created the stage for my response. I leaned back, inhaled slowly, and let anticipation build, the city lights flickering through the blinds like sparks of opportunity. Tonight, patience had won the first round, but the next would be decisive. The turning point had arrived, and I was ready. The evening air hung heavy over the family estate, a quiet tension settling in that felt almost tangible. I moved through the rooms with deliberate steps, each one measured, each one purposeful. The plan I had spent weeks crafting was now set into motion. I checked my tablet once more. Evidence compiled, witness statements verified, legal notices queued. Every detail aligned. There was no room for error. My heart raced under a calm exterior, the surge of anger contained but fueling an inner focus sharper than ever. I could almost feel the shift in the air, as though the house itself sensed the coming reckoning. I started by laying out the discrepancies in the house ownership documents to key family members. Faces that had always masked neutrality now flickered with surprise, guilt, and thinly veiled denial. I presented the evidence with measured authority, highlighting unauthorized actions by my brother-in-law. Every revelation drew reactions, a mix of whispered disbelief and anxious glances. My tone was firm but controlled, asserting both legal and moral authority without raising my voice. I watched closely, noting who noticed which detail, who shifted uncomfortably, who remained defiant. Each subtle reaction confirmed my anticipation that the stage was perfectly set. The fallout escalated quickly. My brother-in-law attempted to cover his tracks, casting doubt with half-truths and quick explanations, but I countered each attempt calmly, presenting irrefutable proof, tracing every alteration, every unauthorized signature. Family members started aligning, some quietly siding with me, others remaining silent but visibly affected. There was a tense satisfaction in observing the consequences of years of neglect and underestimation. Past slights and dismissals were now mirrored in the vulnerability of those who had once dismissed me. Each carefully orchestrated revelation added weight to the tension, bringing the confrontation to a peak that had been building for months. Finally, I delivered the decisive evidence, the mic drop moment. Legal documents, witness testimonies, and digital proof laid bare the full scope of manipulation. The room fell silent as the reality settled, my brother-in-law cornered, his usual arrogance stripped away. I felt a quiet triumph, a validation of every careful step and calculated observation. The reversal of power was complete, yet shock lingered across the faces of my family and allies. It was a victory that felt inevitable only in hindsight, shocking in the immediacy of its impact. The weight of acknowledgement and recognition settled over me, a long-sought affirmation that my efforts had been precise, deliberate, and just. As the night deepened, the confrontation concluded, but the awareness of consequences hovered. I knew this was only the beginning of the ripple effect. Eyes that had avoided mine now met with cautious respect. Thoughts raced through my mind. They'll think this is over, but I've only just started setting things right. I leaned back, letting the calm settle, feeling the tension of the evening ebb slightly, but fully aware that the path ahead still required vigilance and deliberate action. The family had witnessed the turning tide, yet the final reckoning was still forming, just beyond the immediate triumph. The late evening settled over Houston with a quiet that felt like a release. I sank into my chair at home, surveying the aftermath of the final confrontation. The weight that had pressed on my chest for months had lifted slightly, replaced with a cautious sense of relief. Family members now acknowledged, some reluctantly, the rightful ownership and authority I had fought for. A few offered glances of remorse, while others stayed distant, wary of the changes in the balance of respect and power. I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the lessons learned. Perseverance, patience, and the careful calibration of strategy had finally paid off. No sentimentality, just clarity, and a recognition that standing firm was the only way forward. Legal matters were now fully resolved. Deeds confirmed my ownership, and all related assets were clearly documented. My brother-in-law's misdeeds had been exposed, formally acknowledged, and there was no room left for dispute. Where possible, subtle reconciliation occurred within the family, careful and realistic, acknowledging the complexity of relationships without forcing false closeness. I maintained my dignity throughout, ensuring justice was served while preserving my own emotional equilibrium. The twist of seeing acknowledgement and cooperation from some family members, balanced with continued caution from others, reminded me that resolution is rarely absolute, but fairness had been established. I felt relief, tempered by the quiet awareness of past neglect and the necessity of remaining vigilant. I spent time reflecting on my personal growth. Years of feeling overlooked had honed my strategic intelligence, patience, and resilience. I recognized my own boundaries and strength, no longer needing external validation to affirm my worth. Lessons about trust, loyalty, and self-advocacy crystallized into a calm confidence. Observing subtle shifts in family dynamics, I noticed seeds of respect taking root where previously there had been indifference. The emotional payoff was profound: empowerment, self-assurance, and readiness for future challenges. I felt a balance between vigilance and peace, knowing I could assert myself effectively without compromising integrity. Growth was measured, steady, and deeply satisfying. In a quiet corner of the living room, I spotted the folded napkin from that long-ago family dinner, the same one I had held onto as a reminder of being overlooked. Picking it up now, it felt symbolic of the transformation I had undergone. From overlooked and betrayed, I had become recognized and self-empowered. The napkin, once a simple object, now embodied my journey. Patience, intelligence, and the careful orchestration of action had brought not only external victory but internal closure. The family, the house, the relationships, they were not perfect, but the arc of justice and personal strength was unmistakable. Hope and reflection settled into the quiet space, a subtle openness to what might come next. I looked directly at the future, calmly contemplating the road ahead. The lessons of perseverance, integrity, and courage were indelibly etched into my experience. There was pride in my actions, and an understanding that standing up for oneself is both difficult and necessary. I felt a quiet connection to anyone who might listen, recognizing that personal agency and careful strategy can prevail even in the face of betrayal. The night closed in, but the sense of accomplishment lingered. I had moved beyond the past, ready to face life with clarity, confidence, and an unwavering sense of self. Reflection brought satisfaction, closure, and the quiet thrill of knowing the fight had been worth every calculated step.